The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Westridge Conservatory of Music as Maria Solano pushed her cleaning cart down the polished hallway. The sounds of students practicing filled the air, some playing beautifully, others struggling through difficult passages. Maria kept her head down as she worked, her movements quiet and efficient. At 42, Maria had perfected the art of being invisible. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a simple bun, her uniform clean but unremarkable, her face free of makeup. She'd worked at the conservatory for nearly 7 years, and most of the teachers still didn't know her name. "Excuse me," a young man said, nearly bumping into her cart as he rushed past with a violin case. He didn't look at her face, just hurried around her like she was another piece of furniture. Maria smiled softly. "No problem," she said, though he was already gone. This was how most of her days went. The students and teachers lived in a world of music and passion, while she existed on the edges, sweeping floors and emptying trash bins. Few people noticed how her eyes lingered on the grand pianos as she dusted them, or how her fingers sometimes hovered above the keys before pulling away. Professor Chen walked by, deep in conversation with the conservatory's director, Mr. Reynolds. They were discussing an upcoming recital, their voices animated with excitement. "The acoustics in that hall are perfect for Bach," Professor Chen said. "You can hear every note with such clarity." They passed Maria without a glance. She was used to this, the way people's eyes slid over her like water over stone. It hadn't always been this way. When Maria finished her morning rounds, she took her lunch break in the small break room near the maintenance office. The room was empty except for Luis, the groundskeeper, who nodded hello before returning to his sandwich. Maria unwrapped her simple lunch, a ham sandwich, an apple, and a small container of yogurt. As she ate, she gazed out the window at the students crossing the courtyard, carrying instrument cases and laughing together. 28 years ago, she had been like them. A young girl with dreams as big as the sky, practicing for hours each day at her family's old upright piano in their small apartment in Buenos Aires. Her teacher, Senor Vasquez, had called her a prodigy, had arranged for scholarships and special lessons. "You have a gift, Maria," he'd told her, "a rare gift that must be shared with the world." At 14, she had performed Chopin's Ballade No. 1 at the Teatro Colón, her fingers dancing across the keys with a confidence that belied her age. Critics had praised her emotional maturity and technical brilliance. Her future had seemed set. Conservatories in Europe had already shown interest. Then came the accident that took her father and left her mother partially paralyzed. The medical bills had piled up. The practice hours had given way to work hours. Her hands, once reserved for creating beauty, had turned to washing dishes, cleaning houses, doing whatever was necessary to survive. A loud burst of laughter from the hallway pulled Maria from her memories. She glanced at her watch and quickly packed up the remains of her lunch. Break time was over. The afternoon passed in a blur of routine tasks. She cleaned the practice rooms on the second floor, wiped down the bathrooms, and mopped the lobby. By 6 o'clock, most of the students and faculty had left for the day. Maria finished her shift by vacuuming the recital hall, the powerful machine drowning out her humming as she worked. "Good night, Maria," called the night security guard Mr. Patel as she clocked out. He was one of the few people who actually noticed her. "Good night, Mr. Patel. See you tomorrow." "Your mother doing better with that new medicine?" he asked, looking up from his crossword puzzle. Maria's face softened. "Yes, the doctor says her breathing is improved. Thank you for asking." Outside, the evening air was cool against her skin. Maria waited at the bus stop, watching as the city lights began to twinkle in the gathering dusk. The bus ride home took 40 minutes, during which she rested her head against the window and closed her eyes, listening to the rhythm of the road beneath the wheels. Her apartment building was old but well kept, 5 stories of brick with window boxes showing the first blooms of spring. Maria climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, her legs heavy with the day's work. "Mama, I'm home," she called as she unlocked the door. Elena Solano sat in her wheelchair by the window, a book open on her lap. At 68, her face was a map of fine lines, but her eyes were bright and alert. "There you are, my dear. How was your day?" Maria hung up her jacket and kissed her mother's cheek. "The same as always." "How are you feeling?" "Better today. I managed to wheel myself around the apartment a bit while you were gone." Pride swelled in Maria's chest. Her mother's determination had never wavered. Not through the accident, not through the move to a new country, not through all the years of hardship. That's wonderful. Mama, let me make us some dinner. They ate together at the small kitchen table, sharing stories from their day. Elena had been watching a cooking show and wanted to try a new recipe. Their neighbor, Mrs. Garcia, had stopped by with some magazines. Small things, ordinary things, but they filled their life with quiet contentment. After dinner, Maria helped her mother get ready for bed, making sure she took her evening medications. "You should play tonight," Elena said as Maria tucked the blanket around her. Maria hesitated. "It's late, Mama." The walls are thick and Mrs. Garcia is half-deaf anyway. Elena reached out to touch her daughter's hand. "Your soul needs it, Maria. I can see it in your eyes." Once her mother was asleep, Maria sat in the living room, staring at the upright piano against the wall. It wasn't anything special. A second-hand Yamaha she'd purchased with 3 years' worth of saved tips from her previous job as a waitress. The finish was scratched in places and one of the pedals squeaked, but the sound was still true. Maria's fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the key cover. This was her secret ritual, these late-night sessions when the world was quiet and she could remember who she used to be. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the cool ivory against her skin. She began with simple scales, warming up her fingers. Then she moved into a Chopin nocturne, letting the gentle melody fill the small apartment. As she played, the years fell away. She was no longer a tired janitor with calloused hands, but a musician speaking through the language of notes and harmonies. The nocturne gave way to something more complex, Beethoven's Pathétique Sonata. Her fingers found the keys without hesitation, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought left off. The passionate music swelled around her, and Maria closed her eyes, surrendering to its power. For nearly an hour she played without stopping, moving from one piece to another like a traveler visiting beloved landscapes. Bach, Mozart, Liszt, they were all there waiting in her fingers, in her heart. When she finally stopped, her cheeks were wet with tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. In the doorway to the bedroom stood Elena, supporting herself against the frame. "Mama, you shouldn't be up," Maria said, rushing to help her. Elena waved her away. "I needed to hear you play. To really hear you, not just through the door." She cupped Maria's face in her hands. "Why do you hide this gift? Why do you let those people at the conservatory think you are nothing but a woman who cleans?" Maria helped her mother back to bed before answering. "It's easier this way, Mama. That life is gone." "No," Elena said firmly. "The life may be gone, but the gift remains. You are still you, Maria. Still the girl who made an entire theater hold its breath." Maria smoothed the blanket over her mother's legs. "Get some rest. I have an early shift tomorrow." Later, lying in her own bed, Maria stared at the ceiling. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, along with the music that still seemed to hover in the air of their small apartment. Perhaps Elena was right. The gift remained. But what good was a gift that no one would ever see? What use was talent buried beneath years of practical necessity? Tomorrow would be the same as today. She would push her cart through the hallways of Westridge Conservatory. She would dust the pianos that others played. She would listen to music created by hands more privileged than hers. And she would remain invisible, a shadow moving along the edges of a world that had once been meant to be hers. Maria turned onto her side and closed her eyes. In her dreams, at least, she still performed on grand stages to audiences that stood to applaud her. In her dreams, her father was still alive, smiling proudly from the front row. In her dreams, her hands were made for music, not for scrubbing floors. But dreams, like music, eventually fade into silence. And morning always comes, bringing with it the reality of the life she now lived. A simple woman with an extraordinary secret that no one at Westridge Conservatory could possibly suspect. 3 days before the Westridge Conservatory's annual fundraising gala, Professor Lawrence Hammond burst through the door of Dean Richardson's office without knocking. His normally neat silver hair was standing up in tufts, as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. "Anton Volkov just canceled," he said, his voice tight with panic. Dean Richardson looked up from his computer, the color draining from his face. "What? That's impossible." "The gala is this Saturday," his manager called. "Volkov broke 2 fingers in a car door. He can't play for at least 6 weeks." "Good God." The dean pushed back from his desk, stood up, and began to pace. The trustees will be there. The mayor, every major donor in the city. Volkov was the whole reason they bought tickets. The annual fundraising gala wasn't just another concert. It was the financial backbone of the entire conservatory, bringing in over half their yearly donation budget in a single night. Without those funds, scholarship programs would be cut, facility improvements postponed, and guest artist residencies canceled. We need to find a replacement now. Dean Richardson reached for his phone. I've already called every concert pianist within a 200-mile radius, Professor Hammond said, sinking into a chair. They're all booked or out of town. What about our faculty? No one's prepared to play Rachmaninoff's Third at 3 days' notice. It's one of the most difficult concertos in the repertoire. That's why we hired Volkov in the first place. Outside the office, Maria Solano quietly mopped the hallway floor, catching bits of their conversation through the half-open door. She kept her head down, focusing on the rhythmic movement of the mop. What about one of the graduate students? The dean asked desperately. I already asked Thomas Lee. He laughed in my face, said he'd need 3 months minimum. Then we'll have to change the program. Something simpler. The invitation specified Rachmaninoff's Third. It's been advertised for months. People are expecting a showstopper. The door swung open wider as Professor Victoria Chen joined the conversation, her high heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. Maria moved her mop to the other side of the hallway, trying to make herself even less noticeable. I just heard about Volkov, Professor Chen said. This is a disaster. Mrs. Whitmore already called me asking for confirmation of the rumor. How did she hear so quickly? The dean groaned. Bad news travels fast. Professor Chen crossed her arms. We need a solution, gentlemen, and we need it now. The three of them fell into stressed silence. Maria quietly wrung out her mop in the bucket, the squeaking sound making Professor Hammond glance her way. He stared at her for a moment, then let out a harsh laugh. Well, we could always have the cleaning lady play, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. At this point, we might as well put anyone on that stage. Maria kept her eyes on the floor, her hands tightening on the mop handle. Dean Richardson looked at Professor Hammond, then at Maria, then back to Hammond. His expression slowly changed from annoyance to consideration. You know, he said slowly, you might be onto something. What? Professor Chen asked. You can't be serious. The dean stepped into the hallway. Excuse me, miss? Yes, you. Could you come in here for a moment? Maria looked up, her heart suddenly racing. Sir? Please, just for a minute. Reluctantly, Maria propped her mop against the wall and followed the dean into his office. She stood just inside the doorway, hands clasped in front of her, eyes darting between the three professors. What's your name? The dean asked. Maria Solano, sir. Maria, do you play any instruments? She hesitated. A little piano, sir. Nothing special. Professor Chen rolled her eyes. Dean Richardson, this is ridiculous. No, hear me out, the dean said, holding up a hand. We're in an impossible situation. We need someone, anyone, to sit at that piano on Saturday night. I don't understand, Maria said softly. The dean turned to her with a forced smile. Maria, how would you like to make some extra money this weekend? Sir? We have an event on Saturday. Our pianist had to cancel. We need someone to fill in. Professor Hammond leaned forward. Dean, you can't possibly think, what choice do we have? The dean snapped. Cancel the entire gala? Return $500,000 in ticket sales? Watch our reputation collapse? But she's the janitor, Professor Chen whispered, as if Maria couldn't hear her. She's someone who can sit at a piano and press keys, the dean replied. At this point, that's all we need. Maria's face flushed. Sir, I really don't think we'll pay you double your usual daily wage, the dean said. All you have to do is show up, wear something nice, and do your best with the piece. No one's expecting miracles. The piece? Maria asked, her voice barely audible. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, Professor Hammond said, watching her face carefully. Maria felt her stomach drop. One of the most notoriously difficult pieces in the classical repertoire. A piece she had once known by heart, had once performed to a standing ovation in Buenos Aires. A piece she hadn't touched in 20 years. I can't, she stammered. It's too hard. I wouldn't be able to play it properly. No one expects you to play it properly, the dean said bluntly. We just need someone sitting at that piano. The donors will be disappointed, but at least the event will go on. Professor Chen sighed. I suppose it's better than canceling entirely. We can explain the situation, lower everyone's expectations. Exactly, the dean nodded. We'll tell them our star pianist had an accident, and one of our staff bravely volunteered to step in. It might even generate some goodwill. Maria looked between their faces, seeing only desperation, not understanding. They had no idea what they were asking. No idea who they were asking. Triple my daily wage, she said suddenly, surprising even herself. The dean blinked. Excuse me? If I do this, I want triple my daily wage. And 2 days off to practice, Professor Hammond laughed. Practice? For Rachmaninoff's third? I'll need to at least try, Maria replied, her voice firmer now. The three professors exchanged glances. Fine, the dean said. Triple wage, 2 days off. But you'll play on Saturday, no backing out. Maria nodded slowly. I'll play. Later that evening, as Maria rode the bus home, her mind raced. What had she just agreed to? After all these years of hiding, of keeping her past buried, she had just volunteered to perform one of the most difficult piano concertos in the world in front of hundreds of people. Her hands trembled in her lap. Would her fingers even remember? 20 years was a long time. And she would be playing on a concert grand, not her worn upright. The weight of the keys would feel different. The sound would be bigger, richer. When she got home, Elena could tell something was wrong immediately. What happened? She asked as Maria hung up her coat. Maria sat down heavily on the sofa. I've done something crazy, Mama. She explained the situation, the canceled pianist, the desperate dean, her impulsive agreement. Elena listened without interrupting, her eyes growing wider. The Rachmaninoff third, she breathed when Maria finished. Your favorite piece. When I was 17, Maria corrected. That was a lifetime ago, and now God has dropped this opportunity in your lap. Elena leaned forward in her wheelchair. Don't you see? This is your chance to play again. Really play. They don't want me to really play, Mama. They want a warm body at the piano, a placeholder. They've already decided I'll fail. Then prove them wrong. Maria shook her head. I can't. I'm not that girl anymore. Yes, you are. Elena wheeled herself closer, taking Maria's hands in hers. These hands haven't forgotten. The music is still inside you. Maria looked down at their intertwined fingers, her mother's thin and lined with age, her own rough from years of cleaning. Once these hands had brought audiences to their feet. Once they had flown across the keys with precision and passion. I'm scared, she whispered. Of course you are. Elena smiled gently. But you faced worse, my brave girl. And this time you get to face it with music. That night Maria couldn't sleep. She got up and sat at her piano in the darkness, not playing, just resting her fingers on the cool keys. The Rachmaninoff began to play in her mind. Those thunderous opening chords, the lyrical middle section, the fiendishly difficult cadenza. Could she do it? After all this time? The professors at Westridge didn't think so. They had looked at her and seen only a janitor, someone to fill a gap, a body to place on stage during their crisis. They expected her to embarrass herself, to play a few notes and then fumble through the rest. They had no idea who Maria Solano really was. No idea what she had once been capable of. Maybe it was time they learned. As the first light of dawn crept through her window, Maria made her decision. She would play on Saturday, not as the placeholder they wanted, but as the pianist she used to be. The pianist she still was somewhere deep inside. And for the first time in 20 years, the thought of sitting before an audience filled her not with dread, but with a flicker of something she had almost forgotten, joy. The next morning, Maria arrived at the conservatory an hour earlier than usual. Her heart pounded as she knocked on the administration office door. Come in, called the office manager, Mrs. Winters. Maria stepped inside, clutching her purse strapped tightly. Good morning. I need to fill out a time-off request. Mrs. Winters raised an eyebrow. In 7 years, Maria had never asked for time off outside of scheduled holidays. Everything all right? Yes, Dean Richardson approved it already. For practicing. Practicing? Mrs. Winters looked confused. For the gala on Saturday. I'm filling in for Mr. Volkov. Mrs. Winters' mouth fell open. You're what? Maria shifted uncomfortably. It was the dean's idea. After filling out the paperwork, Maria walked through the still quiet hallways toward the practice rooms. Most were locked, reserved for students and faculty. But she knew there was one place no one would look for her. In the basement, past the boiler room and storage closets, sat an old practice room that had been mostly forgotten when the new wing was built 5 years ago. The piano there was an aging Yamaha Grand, not nearly as fine as the Steinways upstairs, but it was in tune and the room had good acoustics. Maria had discovered it years ago while searching for a mop sink. Sometimes on her lunch breaks she would sneak down to play for a few precious minutes. Now, it would be her sanctuary for the next 2 days. She closed the door behind her, set down her bag, and pulled out the sheet music she'd printed at the public library last night. Taking a deep breath, she sat at the piano bench and flexed her fingers. "Start from the beginning," she whispered to herself. Upstairs, Dean Richardson called an emergency faculty meeting in the conference room. 20 professors sat around the long table, all looking concerned. "As you may have heard, Anton Volkov has canceled his performance due to injury," the dean announced. "Rather than cancel the gala entirely, we've found an alternative solution." Professor Hammond cleared his throat. "One of our maintenance staff has agreed to sit in." Murmurs of shock rippled through the room. "You can't be serious," said Professor Turner, the violin instructor. "The Rachmaninoff Third? Performed by a janitor?" "Her name is Maria Solano," Professor Chen corrected, though her tone suggested she shared his disbelief. "It's not ideal," the dean admitted. "But we need to manage this crisis. I'm drafting apology letters to our major donors explaining the situation. We'll emphasize that the show must go on, that we're demonstrating resilience in the face of adversity." "It will be a disaster," someone muttered. "Perhaps," the dean agreed. "But a controlled disaster is better than no performance at all. The woman claims she plays a little piano. If she can manage even part of the first movement, we can cut to the reception early." Professor Hammond turned to his teaching assistant, a graduate student named Sophie Lee. "Sophie, could you draft those apology letters? Make them gracious but realistic about what to expect." Sophie nodded, though she didn't share the faculty's dismissive attitude. "I'll take care of it, Professor." As the meeting disbanded, Professor Turner shook his head. "I almost don't want to watch." "Like a car crash in slow motion," agreed Professor Hammond. In the basement, Maria's fingers stumbled over a difficult passage. She frowned, returned to the beginning of the section, and tried again. Slower this time, focusing on the movement of each finger. It had been so long since she'd attempted something this challenging. Her hands felt stiff, uncooperative. The muscle memory was there, buried deep, but it would take time to resurface. Time she didn't have. For 3 hours, she worked through the first movement, breaking it down into smaller sections, playing each one until her fingers began to remember. By mid-morning, sweat dampened her forehead and her shoulders ached from tension. "You need to relax," she told herself, remembering her old teacher's words. "The music flows through your whole body, not just your hands." She stood up, stretched, and walked around the small room. Then she sat down again, closed her eyes, and just listened to the music in her mind before returning to the keys. This time, her touch was lighter, more fluid. The notes began to sing. Upstairs, Sophie Lee sat at her desk in the faculty office, drafting apology letters as instructed. "Due to unforeseen circumstances, our scheduled pianist Anton Volkov is unable to perform," she typed, trying to sound professional while essentially telling donors that the performance would be a disappointment. After finishing the draft, she realized she needed Professor Hammond's signature on some scholarship forms before he left for lunch. He wasn't in his office, so she headed to the mailroom to check there. Passing through the basement hallway, a shortcut few people used, Sophie heard something that made her stop mid-step. Piano music. Not the hesitant practicing of a beginning student, but something powerful and complex. Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto. Curious, she followed the sound to a door she hadn't noticed before. It was slightly ajar, and through the crack, she could see a woman in a gray uniform seated at a piano, her back to the door, her hands moving across the keys with surprising skill. The janitor. Maria. Sophie stood frozen, listening. The woman wasn't playing perfectly. There were hesitations, missed notes, but beneath the roughness was undeniable talent. This was not someone who played a little piano. This was someone with serious training. She watched for another minute, mesmerized, before quietly stepping away. She didn't want to interrupt or embarrass Maria, but as she walked back upstairs, Sophie felt a growing sense of excitement. The faculty had no idea what was coming. Instead of finishing the apology letters, she began revising them, making them more ambiguous, less apologetic. Due to unforeseen circumstances, we will be presenting an unexpected performer. She smiled to herself as she typed. By late afternoon, Maria's hands were cramping. She massaged her fingers, wincing. Too many years of scrubbing floors and not enough time playing had taken their toll. But underneath the pain was satisfaction. The first movement was coming back to her, and portions of the second. The third would be the most challenging, with its notorious technical demands. One step at a time, she told herself. She packed up her things, making sure to leave the room exactly as she'd found it. No one could know she was practicing here. She wanted no advice, no scrutiny, no well-meaning interference. When she got home, Elena was waiting eagerly. "How did it go?" she asked as Maria walked through the door. Maria collapsed onto the sofa. "My hands hurt. My back hurts. Everything hurts. But the music." A smile spread across Maria's face. "It's still there, Mama. Buried, but there." That night after dinner, Maria sat at her own piano, playing more softly now so as not to disturb the neighbors. She worked on the finger patterns without pressing the keys all the way down, training her muscles to remember. Elena watched from her wheelchair, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You look like yourself again," she said softly. The next day followed the same pattern. Maria arrived early, slipped down to the basement practice room and worked through the concerto section by section. By mid-afternoon, her confidence was growing. The piece was coming back faster than she had dared to hope. During her brief lunch break, she overheard two professors talking in the hallway. "I heard she can barely play chopsticks," one said with a laugh. "The dean is sending out apology letters today," the other replied. "Apparently, they're going to cut the performance short and move to the reception as quickly as possible." Maria kept her eyes down as she passed them, but inside, a small flame of determination grew stronger. Let them think what they wanted. Saturday night would speak for itself. In the faculty wing, Sophie Lee was fielding phone calls from concerned donors. "I assure you, Mrs. Blackwell, Saturday's performance will be worthwhile," she said smoothly into the phone. "Sometimes the most extraordinary music comes from unexpected sources." After hanging up, she noticed Professor Hammond watching her with a frown. "You sound oddly optimistic about this train wreck," he said. Sophie shrugged. "I just think we shouldn't underestimate people, Professor. Have you heard her play?" "No," Sophie lied, feeling a strange loyalty to Maria. "But I believe in giving people a chance." On Friday afternoon, Maria played through the entire concerto for the first time. There were still rough patches, especially in the third movement, but the heart of the piece was there. Her fingers had found their way home. As she played the final chords, she heard a soft sound and turned quickly to find Sophie standing in the doorway. "I'm sorry," Sophie said quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude. I heard you yesterday and I wanted to hear more." Maria stood up, her face flushing. "Please don't tell anyone." "I won't," Sophie promised. "But they're going to find out tomorrow anyway, aren't they?" "Yes," Sophie smiled. "They have no idea, do they?" "The professors?" "No," Maria admitted. "Good." Sophie's eyes sparkled. "I can't wait to see their faces." She hesitated, then added, "Do you need anything?" "For tomorrow, I mean. A dress, shoes?" Maria shook her head. "I have something. It's old, but it will do." "Well, if you change your mind." Sophie pulled out a business card and handed it to her. "Call me anytime." "I want to help." After Sophie left, Maria sat for a long time staring at the piano. Tomorrow night, everything would change. Her carefully constructed anonymity would be shattered. People would see her, really see her, for the first time in decades. The thought was terrifying and thrilling. At home that night, Maria opened her closet and pulled out an old garment bag from the back. Inside was a simple black dress she had worn for performances in another lifetime. It was outdated now, and slightly loose on her thinner frame. But with a few safety pins, it would work. "Try it on," Elena urged. Maria slipped into the bathroom and emerged a few minutes later in the dress. Elena clasped her hands together. "Beautiful. Just like before." "I'm not the same as before, Mama." "No," Elena agreed. "You're stronger now." That night, Maria barely slept. Her mind kept playing the concerto over and over, finding the difficult passages, rehearsing them mentally. By the time dawn broke, she felt exhausted but strangely calm. The day of the gala had arrived. In less than 12 hours, Maria Solano, the invisible janitor of Westridge Conservatory, would step onto the stage and reveal her true self to an audience of hundreds. And not a single person, except for her mother Sophie and herself, had any idea what was coming. Maria woke before her alarm clock the next morning. The weight of what she had agreed to do pressed on her chest like a stone. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire, and she had just 2 days to prepare. She moved quietly around the apartment, not wanting to wake her mother. As she made coffee, her hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, she realized, but from excitement. How long had it been since she felt that particular flutter in her stomach? That mixture of nervousness and anticipation that came before a performance? Too long. The conservatory was quiet when Maria arrived, the early morning sunlight casting long shadows through the high windows. She had come dressed in her uniform, the practical shoes, the gray pants and shirt, but carried a small bag with her sheet music and a recording of the concerto she had found online. First, she needed to find somewhere to practice. The main rehearsal rooms would be impossible. They were always booked by students and faculty. The practice rooms in the West Wing were smaller, but still required reservations. Maria needed somewhere private, somewhere no one would think to look for her. She made her way to the basement. Years of cleaning the building had given her an intimate knowledge of its layout, including the places most people never visited. Past the maintenance room and storage areas was an old practice room that had been largely forgotten after renovations 5 years ago. The piano there was a Kawai Grand, not as prestigious as the Steinways upstairs, but well-maintained and rarely used. Maria unlocked the door with her master key and slipped inside. The room smelled of dust and old sheet music. She turned on the lights, set down her bag, and approached the piano with reverence. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them, familiarizing herself with their feel. Then, taking a deep breath, she sat on the bench, straightened her back as her teacher had taught her all those years ago, and placed her hands in position. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's concerto filled the small room. Her fingers were stiff, unwilling to stretch across the complex chord patterns. She hit wrong notes, stumbled over passages that had once been automatic. Frustration bubbled up inside her. "Patience," she whispered to herself. "It's been 20 years. She started again, slower this time. Measure by measure, she worked through the opening of the first movement. After an hour, her hands were aching, but the music was beginning to flow more naturally. Upstairs, the faculty gathered for their morning meeting. The air in the conference room was tense as Dean Richardson discussed the situation with the gala. "I've drafted letters to our major donors," he said, passing out copies. "We're setting expectations appropriately low." Professor Hammond skimmed the letter. "Due to unforeseen circumstances, we will be presenting an alternative performer. This is rather vague, isn't it? Would you prefer I write, 'Our janitor will be butchering Rachmaninoff while you eat your overpriced chicken dinner'?" The dean asked dryly. Several professors chuckled nervously. "Has anyone actually heard her play?" asked Professor Weber from the voice department. "She claims she plays a little," Professor Chen replied, making air quotes. "Which probably means twinkle, twinkle, little star with one finger. We'll cut the performance short and move quickly to the reception," the dean assured everyone. 20 minutes max, then we distract them with champagne and dessert." Meanwhile, in the basement, Maria had moved on to the second part of the first movement. Her fingers were remembering more quickly now, finding the patterns that had once been so familiar. The music was coming back to her body, if not perfectly, then at least with growing confidence. She lost track of time as she practiced, going over difficult sections repeatedly until they began to smooth out. When she finally checked her watch, she was shocked to see it was already past noon. Maria packed up quickly and made her way to the cafeteria for her lunch break. As she ate her sandwich at a corner table, she overheard 2 faculty members talking at a nearby table. "I heard they're letting the cleaning lady play at the gala," one said. Quietly, "You're kidding." "Nope, some emergency replacement for Volkov. It's going to be a train wreck. Poor woman. They're just setting her up to fail." Maria kept her eyes on her food, but a small smile played at her lips. Little did they know. After lunch, she returned to the basement practice room for 3 more hours of intensive work. By the end of the day, her fingers were cramping and her back ached from sitting hunched over the piano. But the first movement was coming together. There were still rough spots, especially in the cadenza, but the outline was there. The next day followed a similar pattern. Maria arrived early, practiced for hours in the basement, took a short break for lunch, then returned to the piano. This time she focused on the second and third movements. The physical toll was intense. Years of cleaning had given her strong arms and back, but different muscles were needed for piano playing. Her forearms burned and her fingers felt like they might lock up at any moment, but beneath the discomfort was a growing sense of joy. The music was returning to her, flowing from somewhere deep and long forgotten. In the afternoon, a soft knock on the door made her jump. She quickly closed the piano lid and stood up. "Yes?" she called out. The door opened slightly and a young woman peeked in. Professor Hammond's assistant, though Maria couldn't remember her name. "I'm sorry to disturb you," the young woman said. "I'm Lily, Professor Hammond's TA. How did you find me?" Maria asked, her heart racing. Lily smiled apologetically. "I heard someone playing. I was looking for an old filing cabinet and—" She hesitated. "You're really good." Maria felt her face grow hot. "Please don't tell anyone." "I won't," Lily promised. "But why hide it?" Maria looked down at her hands, calloused from years of work, but still a musician's hands underneath. "It's complicated." Lily nodded as if she understood. "They're all talking about tomorrow night, you know. The professors, they think it's going to be a disaster. Let them think that." A slow smile spread across Lily's face. "You're going to surprise them, aren't you?" "That's not why I'm doing this," Maria replied. But even as she said it, she realized it wasn't entirely true. Part of her did want to see their faces when they realized who she really was. "Well, whatever your reason, I think it's brave," Lily said. "And if you need anything, a dress, shoes, anything at all, just let me know." After Lily left, Maria returned to practicing with renewed determination. By the end of the day, she could play through the entire concerto. It wasn't perfect, there were still mistakes and hesitations, but the essence of the piece was there. That night, as she massaged her aching hands at home, Elena watched her with shining eyes. "Tomorrow is the big day," her mother said. Maria nodded. Unable to speak past the lump in her throat, "Are you afraid?" Elena asked gently. "Yes," Maria admitted, "but not of the music. Of being seen." Elena reached out and took her daughter's hands. "For too long you've been invisible, my darling. It's time for the world to see you again." Maria slept poorly that night, the notes of the concerto running through her head like a river. She dreamed of her father sitting in the front row of the Teatro Colón, his face glowing with pride as she took her bow. She woke before dawn, tears on her cheeks. The day of the gala passed in a blur. Maria cleaned the conservatory as usual, ignoring the whispers that followed her through the hallways. Everyone knew by now that she would be playing that night, and the looks ranged from pity to amusement to outright skepticism. Let them wonder, she thought, as she polished the brass railings in the main hall. Tonight they would know the truth. In the afternoon, she slipped away to practice one last time. Her fingers moved more confidently now, finding the notes with growing precision. The music sang through her, powerful and passionate. When she finished the final movement, she sat in silence, letting the last echoes fade. "I'm ready," she whispered to the empty room. At home, Maria bathed carefully and washed her hair. From the back of her closet, she pulled out the black dress she had worn for her last recital in Argentina. It was simple but elegant, with long sleeves and a modest neckline. It hung a little loose on her thinner frame, but a few safety pins fixed the worst of it. Elena helped her with her hair, pinning it up in a simple style. Neither of them spoke much. This moment felt sacred somehow, a bridge between past and present. As the sun began to set, Maria stood before the mirror. The woman who looked back at her was neither the child prodigy she had once been, nor the invisible janitor of recent years. She was someone new, someone ready to reclaim her voice. "You look beautiful," Elena said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Maria leaned down to kiss her mother's cheek. "Wish me luck." "You don't need luck," Elena replied. "You have music." As Maria walked toward the bus stop, her music in hand, her heart filled with a strange mixture of peace and anticipation. Tonight, everything would change. The carefully constructed walls she had built around her true self would come down, and for the first time in 20 years, Maria Solano would play not for herself, not for her mother, but for an audience who had no idea what was about to hit them. The Westridge Conservatory gleamed under the evening lights. Valets in crisp uniforms helped wealthy patrons from their luxury cars, while staff hurried about making last-minute preparations. Inside the grand lobby, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over guests in formal attire, their jewelry sparkling as they sipped champagne and exchanged pleasantries. Dean Richardson stood near the entrance, greeting donors with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His bow tie felt too tight and a thin layer of sweat had formed on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. "Wonderful to see you. Mrs. Harrington," he said, shaking the hand of an elderly woman dripping in pearls. "Yes, we're in for quite an interesting evening." Nearby, Professor Hammond and Professor Chen huddled in conversation, their faces grim. "Has anyone seen our pianist?" Professor Hammond asked, checking his watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. Professor Chen shook her head. "Not yet. Perhaps she's come to her senses and run for the hills." "We should be so lucky," he muttered. "The backup plan is ready?" "Yes. I've prepared some remarks about celebrating music education rather than performance. We'll cut the piano portion after 10 minutes, thank her for her bravery, and move straight to dinner." In the small dressing room backstage, Lily knocked softly on the door. "Maria, are you in there?" "It's Lily." The door opened to reveal Maria in her black dress, her hair pinned up elegantly. She looked transformed from the woman who quietly mopped the conservatory's floors. "You look beautiful," Lily said sincerely. Maria gave a nervous smile. "Thank you. I feel strange." "Nervous?" "Yes, but also—" Maria paused, searching for the right word. "Alive," Lily squeezed her arm encouragingly. "I sneaked a look at the program. They didn't even print your last name. Just Maria in small letters where Volkov's name used to be." "That's fitting," Maria said with a small laugh. "I've been just Maria to them for 7 years. A stagehand knocked on the door. 5 minutes, Miss Solano." When he was gone, Lily looked at Maria with curiosity. "Have you done this before?" "Performed, I mean." Maria smoothed her dress. "A long time ago." "Well, for what it's worth, I believe in you." Lily reached out and adjusted a pin in Maria's hair. "Go show them what music really sounds like." In the concert hall, the audience had taken their seats. The stage was set with a gleaming black Steinway grand piano, its lid propped fully open. The orchestra members sat ready, instruments in hand. Dean Richardson stepped to the microphone at the front of the stage, clearing his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Westridge Conservatory's annual fundraising gala." His voice echoed through the hall, drawing the chattering audience to attention. As many of you know, we had originally scheduled the renowned pianist Anton Volkov to perform Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 this evening. A murmur ran through the crowd. Unfortunately, Mr. Volkov suffered an injury earlier this week and is unable to perform. The dean paused, adjusted his glasses. "Rather than cancel tonight's performance, we have asked a member of our conservatory staff to step in." More murmurs, louder this time. "While we cannot promise the virtuosic performance Mr. Volkov would have delivered, we believe that music is about courage and passion as much as technical skill. So please join me in welcoming Maria." The applause was polite but unenthusiastic as Maria walked onto the stage. She looked small against the backdrop of the full orchestra, her borrowed dress simple compared to the finery in the audience. Professor Hammond leaned toward Professor Chen. "This is going to be painful." Maria took her place at the piano bench, adjusting it slightly. She nodded to the conductor, an older man named Maestro Reyes who had been kind to her when she'd met him at the brief rehearsal that afternoon. "Whenever you're ready, my dear," he said quietly. Maria placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes for a moment. The hall was completely silent now. Hundreds of people waiting for what they expected to be an embarrassing display from the conservatory. "Janitor!" She took a deep breath and began to play. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's concerto filled the hall, delicate, questioning, like the first drops of rain before a storm. Maria's fingers moved with practiced precision, finding each note exactly as she intended. In the third row, Professor Chen sat up straighter, her brow furrowed in confusion. The orchestra joined in, and Maria's playing grew stronger. more confident. Her body swayed slightly with the music, her face transformed by concentration and passion. As the first movement built toward its climax, her hands flew across the keyboard in perfect arpeggios, drawing sounds from the Steinway that seemed impossible, given the speed and complexity of the piece. Throughout the audience, people who had been checking their watches or scrolling through their phones now stared at the stage in disbelief. This was not the fumbling amateur performance they had expected. This was extraordinary. Dean Richardson's mouth had fallen open. Beside him, Professor Hammond gripped the armrests of his seat, his knuckles white. As Maria launched into the cadenza, the most technically challenging part of the first movement, a hush fell over the hall. Her fingers danced across the keys with astonishing agility, drawing out both power and delicacy, sometimes simultaneously. The music rose and fell, telling a story of struggle and triumph, of loss and redemption. In the back of the hall, Lily stood watching, tears streaming down her face at the beauty of the performance and the privilege of witnessing this moment of truth. The first movement ended, and before anyone could react, Maria flowed seamlessly into the second. Here the music turned more introspective, and she played with such emotional depth that several audience members found themselves wiping away tears. This was not merely technical skill, though that was abundantly clear, but artistry of the highest order. By the time she reached the third movement, with its driving rhythm and fiendishly difficult passages, the audience was completely transfixed. Maria's face glistened with perspiration, but her focus never wavered. Her hands, which had spent years cleaning floors and scrubbing surfaces, now created magic, drawing forth sounds that seemed to reach into the soul of every listener. In the front row, an older woman in an expensive suit leaned toward her husband. "Who is she?" she whispered. Where did they find her? The final moments of the concerto approached, the triumphant, thundering conclusion that requires both physical strength and absolute control. Maria's whole body seemed to pour energy into the piano as she played the final passages, building to a crescendo that left the audience breathless. Then, with perfect precision, she struck the final chords. The last note hung in the air for a long moment. Complete silence filled the hall. And then, as if a dam had broken, the audience erupted. People leaped to their feet, applauding wildly, some shouting, "Bravo!" at the top of their lungs. The ovation rolled through the concert hall like a wave, growing louder as more people stood. Maria sat motionless at the piano for a moment, eyes closed, letting the sound wash over her. When she finally stood and turned to face the audience, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. She took a small, humble bow, which only made the audience cheer louder. Maestro Reyes approached her, taking her hand and raising it high in a gesture of triumph. The orchestra members were on their feet too, tapping their bows against their instruments in the traditional musician's applause, the highest form of respect one performer can show another. In the audience, Dean Richardson turned to Professor Hammond, his face a mixture of shock and wonder. "Did you know?" he asked, barely audible over the continuing applause. Professor Hammond shook his head, still staring at the stage. "All these years," he said. "She was cleaning our practice rooms. All these years, the applause showed no sign of stopping." Maria took another bow and then another. Someone had brought flowers from somewhere, and now bouquets were being passed forward to the stage. As she accepted them, Maria searched the crowd until she found Lily near the back, giving her a small, private smile of gratitude. The standing ovation continued for nearly 5 minutes. People who had come expecting to endure an amateur stumbling through a difficult piece were now witness to something they would talk about for years to come. The night they discovered a hidden genius, a janitor with the soul and skill of a concert pianist. When Maria finally left the stage, she was immediately surrounded by conservatory board members, all talking at once, asking questions she couldn't process through the emotional fog that enveloped her. "Please," she said softly. "I need a moment." She found her way back to the small dressing room and closed the door, leaning against it. Her heart was racing, her hands trembling, not from nerves now, but from the aftermath of adrenaline and exertion. A knock came at the door. "Maria," it was the dean's voice. "May I come in?" She took a deep breath and opened the door. Dean Richardson stood there, looking utterly transformed from the dismissive administrator who had pressured her into performing just 3 days ago. "Maria," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know what to say." You don't need to say anything, she replied quietly. But I do. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. I need to apologize, we all do. We've had a world-class pianist working as our janitor for 7 years, and we never even bothered to learn your story. Maria looked at him steadily. Would it have mattered if I wasn't a world-class pianist? If I was just Maria who cleans your floors? The dean had the grace to look ashamed. You're right. Of course you're right. He cleared his throat. The audience is asking for an encore, and there are people who want to talk to you. Important people in the music world, Maria nodded slowly. I'll be out in a minute. When she was alone again, Maria looked at her reflection in the small mirror. The woman who gazed back at her was neither the celebrated young prodigy from Buenos Aires, nor the invisible cleaner who had walked the conservatory halls unnoticed for years. She was someone new, someone who had found her voice again. The morning after the gala, Maria woke to the sound of her phone ringing. She had barely slept, her mind still swimming with the events of the previous night, the music, the applause, the faces of shock and wonder. She fumbled for her phone on the nightstand. Hello? Maria Solano? The voice was unfamiliar. This is Robert Wilson from the City Tribune. I was hoping for an interview with the janitor pianist everyone's talking about. Maria sat up, suddenly wide awake. How did you get my number? The conservatory gave it to me. They said you'd be expecting calls. She hadn't been expecting anything. After the encore and a brief reception where she'd been surrounded by people whose names she couldn't remember, Lily had helped her slip away. She'd taken the late bus home, still in her concert dress, drawing curious glances from the few other passengers. I'm sorry. I can't right now, she said, and ended the call. Her phone immediately began ringing again, another number she didn't recognize. She turned it off. Elena wheeled herself into the doorway of Maria's bedroom. Who was that? A reporter. Maria rubbed her eyes. The first of many, I think, Elena smiled. You were magnificent last night, my darling. Your father would have been so proud. Maria nodded, her throat tight with emotion. I need to get ready for work. Work? Elena looked surprised. After last night, you still plan to clean floors today? Maria hadn't considered anything else. For 7 years, her routine had been the same. Wake up, go to the conservatory, clean, come home. The idea that this might change hadn't fully registered yet. It's what I do, she said simply. She showered and dressed in her uniform, made breakfast for herself and her mother, and caught her usual bus. But as soon as she stepped off at the conservatory stop, she knew things had changed. A small crowd of reporters waited by the main entrance. Someone spotted her and pointed. There she is, Maria Solano. Cameras turned in her direction. People hurried toward her, calling questions. How long have you been playing piano? Where did you train? Why were you working as a janitor? Maria froze, overwhelmed by the attention. She had spent years making herself invisible, and now suddenly everyone was looking at her, seeing her. A hand touched her elbow. It was Lily. This way, she said quietly, guiding Maria toward a side entrance. The dean is waiting for you in his office. As they walked through the hallways, students and faculty stopped to stare. Some applauded. Others just watched in silence, as if trying to reconcile the woman in the gray uniform with the virtuoso from the night before. Dean Richardson stood when Maria entered his office. His usual authoritative manner seemed subdued. Maria, thank you for coming in today. Please sit down. Maria perched on the edge of a chair, her hands folded in her lap. I'm still scheduled to clean the second floor this morning, she said. Filling the awkward silence, the dean looked startled. That won't be necessary. In fact, that's what I wanted to discuss with you. He cleared his throat. The board met this morning. In light of your extraordinary performance last night, we would like to offer you a position as our artist in residence. Maria stared at him. Artist in residence? Yes. You would give master classes, perform occasionally, perhaps even take a few advanced students. The salary would be considerably more than your current one. Her mind raced. Teaching at the conservatory? Performing regularly? It was everything she had once dreamed of before life had taken a different turn. I don't have a degree, she said. No formal qualifications. The dean waved a hand dismissively. After what we heard last night, no one cares about papers or credentials. You have something that can't be taught or certified. Maria thought of all the times she had walked these halls, invisible to people like the dean. How many other talented people were overlooked every day because they didn't have the right background or connections? I would like to teach, she said slowly, but not just the students who can afford to come here. I want to work with children from backgrounds like mine. The dean nodded eagerly. We've been trying to expand our community outreach program. You could head that initiative. And I want to finish cleaning today. What? The dean looked confused. Today is my last day as the janitor, but I want to finish it properly. Something like respect flickered in the dean's eyes. Of course. Whatever you want. By lunchtime, news of Maria's story had spread across the city. Local television stations ran segments about the janitor Virtuoso. Someone had recorded her performance on a phone and clips were circulating online. The conservatory's phone lines were jammed with calls from people wanting to know when she would perform next. Maria cleaned as usual, though it felt strange now with people watching her, sometimes approaching to congratulate her or ask questions. She answered politely but briefly, focusing on her work. When she passed the faculty lounge, she heard Professor Hammond's voice. We should have known. All these years watching us teach, listening to our students. She must have been laughing at us. I wasn't laughing, Maria said, stepping into the doorway. Professor Hammond turned, flushing slightly. Several other faculty members sat around the room, all looking uncomfortable. Maria, we were just discussing your remarkable talent. I heard. She met his gaze steadily. I never laughed at any of you. I was grateful to be near music again, even if I couldn't be part of it. Until now. Professor Chen stepped forward. We owe you an apology, Maria, all of us. We looked right through you. Maria shook her head. You saw what I wanted you to see, what I thought I needed to be. She paused. But now I'm ready to be seen again. That evening, when Maria arrived home, she found Elena talking with a visitor, Maestro Reyes, the conductor from the previous night. Ah, Maria, he said, rising to greet her. Your mother has been telling me about your early career in Argentina. Why did you never say anything? Maria set down her bag. It was another life, Maestro. One I thought was over. No musician's life is ever truly over while they can still play. He gestured to an envelope on the coffee table. I've brought you something. An invitation to perform with the City Symphony next month. A proper performance with adequate rehearsal time. Maria's eyes widened. The City Symphony? They would be honored. As would I. He smiled warmly. What do you say? Looking at her mother's hopeful face, Maria felt a strange calm settle over her. I would be delighted. Over the next weeks, Maria's life transformed. She moved with her mother to a ground-floor apartment that was more accessible for Elena's wheelchair, paid for with an advance from the conservatory. She began teaching, not just the privileged students at Westridge, but also children from the poorer neighborhoods where she herself had lived. Her community classes were held in a church basement, with an old upright piano that reminded her of her childhood. The media attention gradually faded, though her story had resonated with many people. Offers came in, recording contracts, concert tours, interviews for magazines. Maria considered them carefully, accepting some and declining others. She had no interest in fame for its own sake, only in the music and in sharing it with others. At the conservatory, her relationship with the faculty evolved. Some, like Professor Chen, made genuine efforts to know her as a colleague and musician. Others remained awkward around her, perhaps still embarrassed by their previous dismissal of her. The students, however, embraced her without reservation, especially those who struggled with confidence or came from backgrounds different from the typical conservatory student. Lily became a close friend, often joining Maria and Elena for dinner and helping with the community classes. You've changed this place, and she told Maria one day as they walked through the conservatory hallways. People look at everyone differently now, wondering what talents might be hidden in plain sight. 6 months after the gala, Maria gave a special performance at the conservatory. The program included works by Bach, Chopin, and Beethoven, but she saved something special for the end, a piece she had composed herself, titled Invisible. The audience that night included everyone from wealthy donors to the children from her community classes. In the front row sat Elena, her eyes shining with pride. Beside her was Mr. Patel, the night security guard who had always asked about Elena's health and noticed Maria as a person when others had not. As Maria played the final notes of her composition, a melody that spoke of patience, perseverance, and ultimately joy, She felt a circle closing. The young girl who had once played with such promise in Buenos Aires. The woman who had cleaned floors while dreams lay dormant within her. And now this new person, a teacher, a performer, someone who had found her voice again. When she stood to take her bow, the applause was thunderous. But it wasn't the validation of the audience that mattered most to her. It was the knowledge that she had remained true to herself through all her transformations, and that music, the constant love of her life, had been waiting for her return all along. After the performance, a young girl from her community class approached her backstage, clutching a worn sheet of music. "Miss Solano," she said shyly, "I've been practicing the piece you gave me, but it's so hard. Sometimes I want to give up." Maria knelt down to meet the child's eyes. "Music is never easy," she said gently. "Neither is life. But don't give up on either one. Promise?" The girl nodded solemnly. "I promise." Later, as Maria and Elena rode home together, Elena reached over to take her daughter's hand. "Are you happy, Maria?" Maria looked out at the city lights passing by the car window, thinking of the day's beginning and how it had led to this moment. "Yes," she said, and the word contained multitudes. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be."